Okay, so we're going to go ahead and explore the flipped classroom and look at the evidence to determine whether or not the flipped classroom works. This will be an introductory exposure related to the concept, and obviously you'll have an opportunity to dive deeper into it as you read additional resources, etc., to really make your own determination about whether it works or not. So first we'll talk about what the flipped classroom is, and then we'll talk about whether or not it works, and then we'll get to a really important question, which is how can we best approach learning both in and outside of the classroom. So what is the flipped classroom? Well, traditionally speaking, it is about having the lectures happen at home, so they've been put onto an online platform, while the active learning then happens in class. So it originally got developed when some faculty members were noticing that students were really struggling with homework and said, well, maybe we need to actually have the homework and the practice time under the supervision of me as their teacher, and instead I could do the content delivery really online. So let's take a look at the history of the flipped classroom. This is not really a brand new concept, although it's been kind of gaining all the buzz really in the last 5 years or so. Back in 1993, King was famous for the expression, don't be a sage on the stage, go be a guide on the side. And then we had folks talking about inverted classroom, which sounds very similar to the flipped classroom. And the onset of tools like Khan Academy really opened the doors for how we could easily shift some of the in-person lectures into the online environment. Because not only could you do it as the teacher, but you could really then bring in the experts in the world by using YouTube and other videos such as that out there to bring to your students. And then Bergman and Sams are the ones who wrote the first kind of classic book on Flip Your Classroom, and kind of really got the buzz going about this approach. So I guess my question is, so haven't we been doing this all along? I mean, when we've asked students to read a chapter before coming to class, the intent of that was so that they do some background learning prior to getting to class so that we'd have some really lively, interactive discussions. So I think it's very similar to that, but now that the difference is we're shifting, not just relying on reading, but now we have the technology tools available to do much more than just reading and really just spread it out into online lecturing as well. So which works better, traditional teaching, flipped classroom? You're going to get to engage in that debate, so I'm not going to go into an enormous amount of detail here because I'm going to ask you to really think about that, but I am going to bring your attention to just a couple of important issues. First of all, I guess you have to ask yourself, do you think there's a difference between an in-person lecture and an online lecture? And if so, what might that be? Some of the other considerations you might want to spend some time thinking about is, what is the impact for students with disabilities? Would this help or hurt, and how might that play a role? What about students who are from different socioeconomic statuses? Those are some other issues. In addition, I want you to think about how can you best use class time, and to also think about time both in terms of instructor and student. So I'm not going to give you an answer completely about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea because I want you to engage in that dialogue, but those are some of the areas you may want to think about. Of course, there's more as well. Those are just some starters for our conversation. So does it work better? Well, I'm going to share a couple of studies with you, and unfortunately there'll be a little bit of contradiction with some of those studies. So this one was a pretty large-scale study, though, by O'Flaherty and Phillips. You can see that they looked at over 1,000 articles on the flipped classroom, and they identified those that were relevant to the higher ed setting, and they found 28 of those articles that were targeting the college student population. And what they found was that the review found very few studies that actually demonstrated robust evidence to support that the flipped learning approach was more effective. Didn't say it was less effective, so they just had difficulty finding evidence that it was more effective. So it does certainly raise the question, I wonder if all this rave is actually translating into increased learning or not. Well, there was one study done by Bepler, Walkler, and Dreesen that did find evidence for this flipped classroom approach. Again, pretty nice size study, over 1,100 students, and students either had the traditional lecture or a flipped classroom experience where there was one time per week that they met, and then the rest was done by online lecture. So it was actually even a reduced class time situation. And what you can see here is that the flipped classroom outperformed the traditional classroom. So there was a significant difference here and test performance. So this is one study that does provide some evidence for the flipped classroom approach. However, I also want to bring your attention to the evidence for lecturing, and you probably remember this from the dynamic lecturing video where there's the evidence out there that lecturing can be quite effective, and in fact having a lot of front end lecture is going to be better than integrating them. So as you can see in this study, case-based learning was really, constructivist kind of approach where students were constructing that knowledge. The faculty member was the guide on the side or facilitator, and they were engaged in cooperative group work. And what you can see here, the green is the groups that outperform the blue. So all lecturing groups kind of outperformed the case-based learning, but the gradual approach where it was front-ended on lecturing and then followed by case-based learning outperformed the alternating method. And what this really speaks to is the power of direct instruction for new students. So students who don't know much about a discipline are going to really benefit from the lecture. I bring this up because I think it's important for you to think about, is the lecture the same online as it is in person? Will we accomplish the same goals? And for those of you who watched the dynamic lecturing video, you also know that the expertise reversal effect was at play. So basically, when students know more about a topic, then they don't need the lecture as much, and they actually do better with more active learning experiences. So what really is the right question? I mean, we have some contradictory evidence here, but I think that the primary thing that you want to ask yourself is, what teaching strategies can I use to best help my students learn both in and out of the classroom? When we first started teaching, years ago, we didn't have many technology tools, so we only had the in-person to rely on, with the exception of printed text. But nowadays there are so many different tools, media, videos, animated things, simulations, lots of different activities. I think that it makes it a more challenging way in some regards for us to really figure out, well, how do we really kind of zoom in on our goal and best accomplish that? And if we have only so much class time and we have only so much out of class time, what do we want to use that time for in order to help us achieve our goal at the end of the day? So I hope that's a quick introduction to the flipped classroom and a little bit of the evidence that exists out there. And I'll look forward to the dialogue that takes place in our classroom about this really important topic.